Hi, everyone. Welcome to the webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started as people kind of trickle in, but we want to jump right into tonight's webcast. Thank you again so much for joining us for tonight's presentation, Stinkin' Cute, the Elusive Life of the Western Spotted Skunk. My name is Danielle Moser, and I'll be your MC for tonight. I'm the Wildlife Program Manager for Oregon Wild, and we are a state-based conservation organization that works to protect and restore Oregon's wildlands, wildlife, and waters. I'm honored to introduce our very special guest for tonight, Marie Tosa. Marie is a postdoctoral scholar in the Department of Botany and Plant Pathology at Oregon State University. Marie completed her PhD at Oregon State University in the Department of Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Sciences with Damon Lesmeister and Tal Levy. For her PhD, Marie spent 2.5 years at the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest near Blue River on the western slope of the Oregon Cascades, studying the natural history of the western spotted skunk. So thank you for being here, Marie. And after her presentation, we'll hear from my esteemed colleague, Victoria Wingel, Oregon Wild's Forest and Climate Campaigner, about our organization's efforts to safeguard the state's mature and old growth forests, which are our best defense against climate change and also provide critical habitat for so many species. Before I turn it over to Marie, I would like to take a moment tonight to offer gratitude to the land itself and for those who have lived here in what is now Oregon since time immemorial. I would also like to acknowledge the continuing presence of Indigenous peoples on the land today. The history of tribes in Oregon is complex and nuanced and includes many colonial legacies and wrongdoings, like forced removal that have had long-lasting and current impacts. It's important to not only acknowledge Indigenous people and the land, but continue to do meaningful work by supporting them in the present, respecting and uplifting tribal sovereignty, and taking action. For more information, please visit our website, which has additional educational resources and ways to get engaged and support that important work. If you're interested in watching this webcast again or want to share it with your family and friends, we will have a recording of this program, which will be emailed out this week and also posted on our website, oregonwild.org. And then for tonight, please enter your questions at any time in the Q&A section. We usually get a flood of questions right at the end of the presentation, so the sooner you can get yours in, the easier it is for me to organize it and get you in the queue. So, and with that, I'm going to stop sharing and turn it over to you, Marie. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Danielle. I'm going to start sharing my screen. Let's make sure, how does that look?
We can see it. Thank you.
Great, awesome. All right, so today I'm going to be talking about the Western Spotted Skunk, which is probably one of my favorite animals in the world. I have had the honor of spending 2.5 years studying this animal and getting really up close and personal to it. But before I get started, I wanted to first acknowledge my advisors, Damon Lesmeister and Tal Levy. Damon was basically the original spotted skunk whisperer, although he studied mostly at the plain spotted skunk in Arkansas. He's really the one who has taught me a lot about the Western spotted skunk and how to study them. How to really get up close and personal with them. And then also Tal Levy, who is my co-advisor at Oregon State University. I would also like to thank all the technicians who have put countless hours into studying these critters and made it possible for us to know what we know now. And then finally, I'd like to thank our funders who have made all this work possible, primarily the USDA Forest Service and the NSF LTER program in Oregon State University. So before I dive in, I wanted to introduce the Western Spotted Skunk to you, nice up close and personal. This spotted skunk is wearing one of our collars, and you can see how awesome they are. Yeah, in case you haven't seen all the social media posts that Oregon Wild has already put up in preparation for tonight's webinar. Of course, you don't get the full effect of the stench of the Western Spotted Skunk from this video, but you can see it in all of its glory. So starting off, if we strictly go by the scientific taxonomy, the Western Spotted Skunk is part of the animal kingdom. It's in the vertebrate phylum, the mammal class, and the carnivore order. It's also within the skunk family, the Mephididae family, and the genus is Spilogale, which is the spotted skunk genus. And its scientific name is Spilogale gracilis. So in Greek, that translates to the slender spotted weasel. In common colloquial language, the spotted skunk has a lot of different names, including the civet cat or polecat, the tree skunk, my personal favorite, the sachet kitty. And so this animal is about the size of a squirrel, and it's only roughly about 1 to 2 pounds, much smaller than the skunk that you might be familiar with in your backyard. One of my favorite ways to describe them is a black tube sock with some splotchy white paint. And you might have heard that in recent news outlets. So one of the things about the western spotted skunk is that it's in the carnivore order. What this means is that it has skull features similar to many of the other carnivores that you might be familiar with, like the cougar, bobcat, wolves, and coyotes. And so some of these features include canines that help these carnivores track down and kill their prey, but also carnassial teeth that help them shred the meat and take that off of those animals that they kill. Western spotted skunks are part of the skunk family, and this is separate from the weasel family that you might be familiar with, the Mustelidae family. This distinction was only made recently in the 90s. And you might understand why these weasels and skunks might have been in the same family before because of their morphology. So if you think about a weasel and you think about a spotted skunk, both of these animals are very long. They have small and short legs. But yeah, according to genetics, we've now split them out into two separate families. The Mephididae family has a lot of variation in diversity. This figure on the right shows the extent of that diversity. The skunk family consists of 4 different genera, including the stink badgers, the hog-nosed skunks, the hooded and striped skunks, and then our favorite, or my favorite, the spotted skunks. And so there are about 12 different extant species in the world right now. Yeah, so you can see a lot of the variation within these species. Some of these skunks can be totally black. Some of them can only have a little bit of white. And yeah, they can still be part of the same species. These skunks inhabit mostly the Americas, North and South America, but stink badgers can also be found in Southeast Asia. So the spotted skunks that we're going to be talking about today are mostly found in North America and Central America. And they coexist a lot with these hooded and striped skunks in the Mephidus genus. One of the things that sets these spotted skunks and skunks in general apart from the rest of the carnivores that we are very familiar with is their stench, the chemical warfare that they can impart on predators and threats to their well-being, their survival. These skunks have these 2 glands next to their anus, which they can expel at very high speeds and pretty much distract a predator if they're being attacked by them, and that allows them to escape those predators. The spotted skunks are really special because they can actually do these handstands pretty instantly, pretty instantly. So it's like they have this little string attached to their tail and somebody is just lifting them up. And so what this allows them to do is that they can both look larger by waving their tail back and forth. This black and white pattern is a signal to larger predators like, hey, you don't want to eat me. I don't taste good. I smell really bad. But this also allows them to look at their predators in the face and make sure that the predators are running away from them um, while they spray their musk that you probably are very familiar with if your dog has been sprayed by a striped skunk in your neighborhood. So the spotted skunk that I've studied for my PhD is the western spotted skunk. So this is the gray blob that you see on the left, but there are other spotted skunks. This taxonomy has actually been revised very recently in about 2022. And so we have this plain spotted skunk and the eastern spotted skunk. And this is kind of their historic range. Um, Despite the chemical defenses that these spotted skunks have, it seems like many of these populations have crashed or declined in recent history, especially the plain spotted skunk population seems to have crashed in the 1940s. And this has caused a lot of state agencies and federal agencies to become concerned because we actually don't know exactly why these populations have crashed. Is it pesticides or disease, or is it hunting pressure, predation pressure? And so many of these spotted skunk populations have either been listed as threatened, endangered, or of concern by a lot of the states which they used to inhabit. In Oregon, the western spotted skunk is considered an unprotected mammal. In a lot of other states, spotted skunks are considered fur bearers, and so there are very limited regulations in terms of how many spotted skunks you can trap. What the harvest season is in Oregon. The harvest season is actually open all year round. And it really only requires that you have a fur bearer license to trap. So you can see how beautiful their pelts are. Unfortunately, the pelt prices are not very high. They go probably from $5 to $30, depending on the year and the demand for them. But because of these trapping records, we actually are able to figure out how their populations have been doing over the years. And so this is one of the ways that we found out that the eastern spotted skunk was a carnivore in trouble. So on this figure, you can see the annual harvest numbers all the way back in 1925, all the way to 1990. And you can see that this population, the annual harvest rates really declined in the 1940s, or started declining in the 1940s, and then really crashed starting in like 1985. And so this prompted a lot of states to post flyers. There was a lot of concern about what was actually happening to these populations. And so there's been a lot more studies recently in the last about 10 to 20 years. Many studies have come out about, where are these spotted skunks remaining? What are they doing? What do they eat? How do they live in these environments? And because of these flyers, we've actually been able to look at the actual distribution of the eastern spotted skunk in much more detail than we've previously been able to do. So you can see that the eastern spotted skunk populations have really contracted over time since the early 1900s. The western spotted skunk is actually still a pretty common carnivore in the Pacific Northwest. This is really fortunate because a lot of people have not ever seen a western spotted skunk unless you've put camera traps out in your backyard or in the forest. But if you do, and if you bait them, if you have the proper permits to bait them, you can actually see a lot of spotted skunks on your cameras. And so this is just a figure that I created of all the different carnivores that we detected in our study. And you can see that the western spotted skunk is by far the most detected carnivore in these systems, followed by the black bear, and then something like the opossum or yeah, raccoons, and bobcats. And so on our landscape, we're very fortunate that this carnivore has remained pretty common, even though we haven't been paying very much attention to it. One of the reasons why we haven't been paying a whole lot of attention to this carnivore, and why it hasn't received a lot of attention in terms of scientific studies, is because spotted skunks are purely nocturnal. They are very active during the night, but not at all active during the day. And so you can see here, these are detections of spotted skunks by hour of night and day. And you can see a lot of those detections occur at night. Yeah, and we're also able to do this now. We know that there are spotted skunks on the landscape now because we have this technology like remote camera traps that are able to take these photos, detect these animals, so we can have a better understanding of these nocturnal and cryptic species that don't like to be seen by humans very often. And so what we actually do know about spotted skunks before I started my study for my dissertation was that there was really only a couple of studies in the Pacific Northwest, especially on the western spotted skunk. And this paper, this Carey and Kirshner paper in 1996, was really the first one to say, hey, we do have these western spotted skunks, but we were actually studying flying squirrels instead. And so this is kind of like an anecdotal. I guess we can write a paper about western spotted skunks, even though that wasn't the focus of our study. And so this paper is one of the first on the western spotted skunk, and really suggested a couple things, that they might be limited by elevation. So they are not at super high elevations, but they're at lower elevations. They might be associated with these riparian areas, so areas near creeks. And then another suggestion that these authors made, was that western spotted skunks might be more abundant in old growth stands. And so this has huge implications in terms of how important old growth is to a lot of the biodiversity of the Pacific Northwest. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the timber wars that happened in the 80s and 90s. And so this could be another species that could be highly impacted by disturbance and logging on the landscape. So when I started my PhD, we really didn't have a lot of information about the western spotted skunk, including things like diet and home range and what kind of habitat it needs. Like I said, that first study is really an anecdotal. We think this is what western spotted skunks are doing and how they're using the landscape, but we really don't know. And we haven't really dived very deeply into that. We also didn't know what are the causes of mortality of western spotted skunks, what kind of things, what kind of structures they need in order to rest during the day when they're sleeping, and what kind of diseases they also have, how those diseases are impacting the western spotted skunks. And so during my dissertation, I started chipping away at some of this unknown some of this unknown, trying to fill in some of these gaps. And so the first thing that we did was to look at diet. And we did that by collecting fecal samples. And then slowly over time, we were collecting more and more information so we could fill in a lot of these gaps as best as we could. So I conducted my study at the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. It's pretty much located smack dab in the middle of the state in terms of north and south. And then it's in the Oregon Cascades on the western slope. This black outline in the middle is the H.J. Andrews Experimental Forest. And it is a really special place because it has a lot of this old growth remaining. If you look outside of the Andrews, so that's this photo on the right here, you can see a lot of that patchwork in terms of logging disturbance. You can see older stands and then more recently cut stands. And this is all in the shadows of the Sisters Mountains. So, the first thing that we did was to look at the diet of these Western spotted skunks. And we were really fortunate to be able to work with these conservation canines, the rogue detection teams. And so, what these teams are, um, they are teams of humans and detection dogs who have been trained to find scat of certain carnivores. So in this case, we sent them samples of Western spotted skunk scats, and we asked them to help us find more scats across the landscape. Um, so this is Jack on the left, the dog, and Scooby on the right. And what they would do is sniff the air, sniff the ground, see if they could find anything that resembled what they were trained to find uh, during their training sessions. And a lot of the scats that we were able to find through these detection dog teams were actually located in some of these rest sites that these skunks were using. And so using genetics, we were actually able to verify that those scats came from those carnivores that we thought they came from. So in this case, it was the Western spotted skunk. And so we had a sample size of 128 skunk scats throughout our study. And what we were able to see is that Western spotted skunks are really these diet generalists. They eat everything from invertebrates to vertebrates to plants. And the diversity of those, each of those taxonomic groups is actually really great. So in terms of the invertebrates, a lot of those were insects and millipedes, even gastropods. So those are things like yellow jackets, millipedes, beetles, and then even snails. And then they were also eating a bunch of different vertebrates, so mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles. And this is kind of like the top 6 species that they were eating. So everything from shrooms to chipmunks, Swainson's thrush, flying squirrels, salamanders, and even frogs. And then in terms of the plants, they were eating a lot of these different plants that have berries. And so they could be eating the berries or they could be eating the seeds from these plant families. And so with this study, we were able to see that these Western spotted skunks are actually linking multiple systems together, everything from aquatic systems. So the amphibians would be the aquatic species that they were consuming. They were linking the terrestrial system to the aquatic system, also the arboreal system, and having a lot of different uh, helping to link a lot of these systems together. They also have functional importance in these forests in the Pacific Northwest by doing things like dispersing seeds. And the other thing that we found, which was really exciting, is that Western spotted skunks were eating something that you wouldn't expect. So this is a Western spotted skunk eating some deer meat, actually. We tracked this skunk using its radio collar to a deer kill site, which was really surprising. And so we were thinking, how is this possible? How is a Western spotted skunk consuming deer meat? It's not like this Western spotted skunk is killing this deer. And so what we came up with is that they are probably scavenging from larger predators. So cougars are very prevalent along on the landscape at the Andrews Forest, and they are apparently capable of sharing their meals with cougars. And so if you look in the literature, what's really cool is that there's this paper that came out. I can get it to play. This is a video of a cougar who has a kill on the right side here. And a spotted skunk is actually able to deter that cougar from eating that deer carcass while it consumes some of that meat. And you can see here that that cougar is not trying to come back to that kill while the spotted skunk is eating. And we think a lot of that is due to the ability of the western spotted skunk to wage chemical warfare on these cougars. So if you think about this, the western spotted skunk is really this tiny, tiny carnivore. It's only about 1 to 2 pounds, and a cougar is about 75 to 160 pounds, depending on whether it's male or female. And so this western spotted skunk is able to fend off a carnivore that is almost 100 times its body size. And so this is like the largest size differential between mammalian species engaging in successful kleptoparasitism, which is really, really cool, I think. It how is this tiny little carnivore able to scare off something so large and so fierce that it's able to kill a black-tailed deer, but is scared of a spotted skunk? Okay, so following that, we conducted more studies on the western spotted skunk by putting collars, radio collars on western spotted skunks. And with this information, by putting these collars on these animals, we can get out a lot more detailed information about home range, habitat, survival, and some of the structures that they need in order to survive. And so over the course of my PhD, we collared 25 different skunks. 9 of them were females, 16 of them were males. And we can start to get a picture of what their life looks like. So this is kind of like a day in the life of a spotted skunk. What are they doing? This figure is showing time of day on the x-axis, and then the temperature is kind of showing whether the skunk was really hunkering down and sleeping. That's represented by these points above the dotted line, the dashed line. And then if the temperature was lower, that meant those skunks were venturing out of their rest sites and foraging or moving around, trying to find some food or mates or something like that. And so what we can see is that western spotted skunks really do just hunker down in the middle of the day from about 6 a.m. all the way to 6 p.m. These skunks are just kind of hanging out, sleeping in their rest sites, their daytime rest sites. But during the night, they go out and forage, but then take breaks in the middle of the night. And so what are they actually doing during that time when they're active? What we were able to see is that these spotted skunks actually have huge home ranges. So anywhere between 4 square miles to 14 square miles is what some of these animals are covering during the course of their foraging bouts. And so if you think about that, this 4 square miles, it's bigger than the home range that I typically have in a day. And it's actually bigger than something like a black-tailed deer also. It's many, many times bigger. And so you can think about these western spotted skunks as spending huge amounts of energy. And if you think about their diet, that means they have to be consuming that energy constantly in order to survive. Something else that we were able to find when we put these collars on these animals is that western spotted skunks are habitat generalists. So they tend to like these wet valleys. They need some sort of cover from predators because they are kind of this tiny little carnivore, especially from predators like owls. And we did find that they do have some sort of a relationship with disturbance on the landscape and in terms of persisting longer in mature forests, but they were venturing out into a lot of these logged areas, foraging. We think maybe those are the areas that have a lot of these berry resources that skunks like to consume. And so something else that was really cool about the western spotted skunk study is that since we were tracking these animals using radio collars, we were able to track these animals to really cool rest site structures. So these are structures that the skunks are using in order to sleep during the day. These are refugia from predators. They provide thermoregulation and then cover from precipitation. So these are some of the examples of those rest site structures that we were able to go to. And so these are photos of those rest sites that were in a lot of these downed logs. And you can see that these are giant trees that are left on the landscape. Most of them have just fallen over. Most of these trees have just fallen over, but they are old growth trees. These are right here on the left, you can just see a clipboard. And so you can see the magnitude of the size of these structures and how important that old growth might be to these western spotted skunks. They also use these burrows that are more frequent in a lot of these disturbed areas. And so we think these are actually burrows that were created by animals like the mountain beaver. And so these are underground structures that the western spotted skunk can use. They also use these rock crevices. Apparently there are a lot of spaces for these skunks to be in. It's not just one solid piece of rock, but a lot of different tunnels and holes are in these structures. And then these are some examples of snags that we found spotted skunks in. Some of them are very decayed snags, but also some are very much still intact. And then finally, the coolest structures that I thought the skunks were using are these live trees. And so these are typically western hemlocks with a lot of heart rot on the inside. And so the skunks are actually going into the tree and then climbing up these structures, which is pretty amazing to think about, and really shocking to know how many of these are actually on the landscape, and you wouldn't know it unless you were tracking these spotted skunks to these structures. Something else that we were able to do because we were tracking these spotted skunks is to figure out what is actually killing these spotted skunks over the course of the year. And so we were able to do some wildlife forensics, again, with the help of our detection dog friends. These collars have a mechanism that alerts you to a collar that hasn't moved within 8 hours. And so when you get that signal, you can go and try to find that collar. When we went out to try and find this collar, we were actually unable to find the collar because it was located at the top of a snag. But what these detection dogs were able to do is find a lot of these pieces of evidence that a kill had occurred. And so on the left, the detection dogs were able to find some intestines. In the middle, they were able to find some whitewash under the snag where the collar was located. And then they were also able to find some scat further away from that snag. Using our genetic methods again, we were actually able to find DNA from barred owls in those scats, along with western spotted skunk DNA. The middle one had some chipmunk DNA, and then the sample on the right also had flying squirrel DNA. And so this find was actually really cool because we're able to see the impacts of a novel predator on some of the native species around. This has drawn a lot of attention in terms of, whether we should be conducting management on the barred owls on the landscape right now in order to save the spotted owl. But the impacts of the barred owl are much greater than just the impacts on a single species, the northern spotted owl. Those impacts are reverberating throughout the food web. And if you think about the impacts of this barred owl on the western spotted skunk, we've seen that the barred owl consumes more western spotted skunks than the northern spotted owl from the owl perspective. But if you look at it from the spotted skunk perspective, these are all of the kills that we were able to find, all of the spotted skunks that died during our study. And we can attribute about 4 of those mortalities to avian predators and mostly owl predation, whereas only 2 of those predation events can be attributed to mammals. And so if you think about that, that's about 44% of the mortalities that we were able to document, and 16% of those animals that we were tracking died by the hands of an owl, most likely a barred owl. And so if you think about an annual mortality rate of about 60% for these spotted skunks, that could mean a pretty significant impact of these barred owls on spotted skunk populations. And so over the course of my PhD, we were able to look at a lot of different things, including diet, home range, habitat, mortality, rest sites, and also didn't have time to talk about this very much today, but also to look at parasites within the western spotted skunk populations, particularly this brain worm that causes these holes in the skull. So if we have time, ask me about that later. But it's been really, really cool to be able to fill in some of these knowledge gaps over the course of my research at Oregon State University. But with a lot of this information that we were able to collect, we still have many, many more questions about what are the impacts of fire in humans and climate change on these western spotted skunk populations. It's also important to remember that a lot of the study that we conducted was on federal lands and not industrial lands. And so the relationship that spotted skunks have with their habitat may be pretty different depending on the intensity of logging on the landscape. I'm really grateful to have been able to spend so much time in the forest studying these critters. They're really just an amazing family of species, and they just have so many adaptations that make them so special. And with that, I'll leave you with this video of a western spotted skunk that we were releasing. And here you can see that that skunk is showing its anal glands to try and ward off my technician.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing and for that wonderful presentation. We definitely have a lot of questions. So we will turn it over to Victoria to talk a little bit about our forest conservation work, which I think ties very nicely with how you just ended your presentation, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So yeah, after this video, if you want to stop sharing and then Victoria can, that would be great.
Yeah, you can also hear the stomping that these spotted skunks do, and that's a way to also warn predators. Like, hey, I'm not super happy with you right now. through some of this?
Great, thank you so much. Okay, Victoria. Oh, did you freeze? Victoria, hello? Okay, I just received a text from Victoria that her computer just froze. So what we will do, technology is doesn't matter how much you prepare for it. And um let's get into a few questions, and then if Victoria can get back on, then we will get to her presentation because we definitely want to do that as well. So couple questions for you while we wait, Marie. But um one person wanted to know, what is the whitewash? Is that urine?
Yeah, so that is yeah, a combination, avian predators, like birds in general just have one hole instead
Hmm.
of the two. And so yeah, it's just urine from the barred owl, yeah.
Gotcha. Um, how high up can spotted skunks climb within the hollows of a tree? Any other climbing? And how do they catch a Swainson's thrush on a nest?
Oh man,
A lot of
I wish
questions in
I
one, but curiosity.
yeah, I wish I knew. Yeah, so during our study, we tried to get spotted skunks to climb trees. Actually, we put bait in on way up in the trees to see if we can get them on camera up there. We never did get a spotted skunk up in the trees, but maybe on the inside, yeah, they can climb definitely like multiple meters. So definitely higher than my height, probably 10 feet or higher. Yeah, not someplace that I could easily reach. So yeah,
Gotcha.
they're pretty adept climbers when they want to be.
Awesome. Well, thank you. We're gonna pivot back. Thank you, Victoria. Technology, as it always is. So we'll go to your presentation, then come back to, we have many more questions to ask. So thank you so much. Victoria, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. So sorry about that. Literally, as soon as your presentation ended, my computer went blank. So happy to be back. Thank you for that presentation. I think my favorite fact ever now is that that skunk is only 2 pounds and can scare a cougar. Um, Let me share my screen. Let's see. Are we seeing this okay?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. So, hi everyone. My name is Victoria Winjel. I am the Forest and Climate Campaigner with Oregon Wild. My main focus is on working towards protections for mature and old growth forests on public lands. Um, so, why am I here talking about forests? Well, old growth and mature forests are biodiversity hotspots. They're home to thousands of species of plants and animals, including our new favorite, the western spotted skunk, and over 100 other threatened and endangered species that rely on the very specific and unique characteristics that an old growth and just an older forest have. Um, so, unfortunately, these older forests are often targeted for aggressive logging that threatens this critical habitat, but also our drinking water and our climate. So, I wanted to come on and tell you all a little bit about why these forests are so important and what you can do to help protect them for wildlife like the western spotted skunk. So, what is an old growth forest? Well, you sort of know when you're in one. As forests age over decades and centuries, they form really complex ecosystems with vibrant living trees at their foundation. A key feature here in an undisturbed older forest is the diversity of tree species, sizes, and ages that help to create the ideal habitat conditions for the species that rely on them, and to keep the forest resilient from threats like wildfire and insect infestation. Natural disturbances create openings for younger trees within these mature forests, which just adds to the complexity that is not well replicated through logging practices and management. But when left to grow, older forests can create cool, shady microclimates and nurture a whole variety of plants and wildlife that would often struggle to survive elsewhere. And our older forests, especially in the Pacific Northwest, are really important for capturing and storing carbon pollution from our atmosphere as well. So they're kind of the unsung heroes when it comes to fighting climate change. And these benefits don't end once the tree dies either. Older forests also have a variety of dead trees, including standing logs, which are called snags, which are important habitat for numerous species like woodpeckers, owls, and rodents, and also fallen large logs like coarse woody debris, which provides food foraging for bears, habitat, cover for rodents, and essential nutrients for new vegetation and tree saplings to grow. So what does this look like? Well, an old growth forest is wild and messy, and that is exactly what we want. Natural forests are really dynamic, so natural disturbances are always changing things, how they look, how they interact with each other, which means healthy old growth forests aren't just big trees, but also the processes and structures that help support the pieces of this really unique ecosystem. So you can see in this picture here, this is a nurse log, which helps to sustain those other trees that are growing out of it. Over here, we can see mushrooms. The mycorrhizal networks beneath the soil literally help the forest to communicate with each other. There's some really great research on how the mycorrhizal networks, the fungus beneath the soil, helps to transport nutrients to each other, really making this one living, breathing ecosystem that relies on each other to thrive. Down here, there's this snag that provides great habitat. You can tell a woodpecker has been in here, and once it's on the forest floor, it provides habitat for especially smaller creatures and insects, maybe food for our skunk friend. And Maria noted that Western skunks also spend their time resting in these as well. And then, of course, there's carbon stored in the soil too, keeping that out of the atmosphere, and keeping our planet from warming. This, on the other hand, is a plantation forest. So you can see here that these trees were replanted very densely. This often happens after logging, and they're evenly spaced with very little room in between them. All of the trees here are the same age and size and species, so it's easy to see that this is not at all a replacement for the unique characteristics that develop over centuries before a forest is considered old growth. These forests are also really great for climate adaptation. So we talked a lot about habitat and the benefits that they provide for all of our little critter friends, but there are also so many other co-benefits, like their ability to mitigate flood and erosion risk. The root systems from the trees literally help hold the ground on steep slopes together to prevent landslides. Forests also provide drinking water for more than 150 million Americans, which helps communities confront climate impacts like drought, heat waves, and changing rainfall patterns. Forests naturally filter rainwater, and so water from forested watersheds is often much cleaner than water from urban or agricultural lands. And of course, older forests are more resistant to fire as well. Older trees have much thicker bark than younger trees do, meaning they're more naturally resistant to these fires. Wildfire in old growth forest typically burns less intensely than in a younger plantation forest where the trees are dense and the fire has a much easier time spreading in between trees. And of course, there are so many other benefits. I don't know about you, but I just love spending time here. These are world-class destinations for outdoor recreation. It's so good for your mental health and well-being to just spend time in a forest. And of course, these places are very special and have value in their own right as well. So unfortunately, not many true old growth forests still exist today. Um, Maria talked about this briefly, but back in the 80s and 90s, before any real safeguards were put in place, aggressive logging claimed about 90% of the old growth trees that were previously found in the United States. So today, most of the remaining mature and old growth forests can be found on federal public lands. And a lot of that can be very much attributed to the Northwest Forest Plan, So for the last 30 years, the Northwest Forest Plan has been relatively successful in preserving our remaining oldest forests. It was a compromise enacted in 1994 to try and end these timber wars, covering 24 million acres within the range of the northern spotted owl. Basically, what this plan did was amend the forest plans across 17 different national forests in Oregon, Washington, and Northern California. Now, this plan was not perfect. It left 1 million acres of mature and old growth still open for logging. And Oregon Wild and our partners are constantly playing whack-a-mole with the agency, fighting some of the most egregious sales that are put forth. And unfortunately, the original plan also excluded Indigenous voices, which is a massive gap that has long needed addressing. So today, the plan is currently under revision. But unfortunately, all of the proposals put forth by the agency would weaken the safeguards that really keep our oldest forests off of the chopping block. So we recently hosted a webcast with more info on the Northwest Forest Plan and how you can save it. So there's a link here if you wanted to watch that and brush up on your knowledge. And we can also share this out in our follow-up email as well if you'd like to learn more. So what can you do to help? Well, right now, the draft environmental impact statement for the proposed amendment for the Northwest Forest Plan is out in the world. And so we're asking folks to tell Congress to oppose weakening the Northwest Forest Plan and demand real protections for wildlife, climate, and old growth forests. So there's a link here that you can follow. We're going to need multiple points of pressure on our side. So we need to demonstrate to Congress that this is an issue that Oregonians care deeply about. So if you follow this link, you can send a letter to Senators Wyden and Merkley and Representative Blumenauer. You can also sign up for our Oregon's Wild's Forest Defense Team for ways to be engaged during the comment period and beyond. We'll have lots to do in the coming months. There's going to be petition drives. We'll need help ground truthing timber sales, art builds, rallies, film screenings, or stacking the room when the Forest Service hosts an info session. We're really going to need all hands on deck to defend these special places. And so when you send your letter above at that link, you'll automatically be added to this list and you'll hear all the ways that you can take action in the coming months. And lastly, submitting your public comments before March 17th, 2025 is going to be hugely important. Be on the lookout for more resources from Oregon Wild early in the new year. Not only will we have a super simple petition for you to sign and submit as a comment, but we're also creating resources to help support you in writing your own unique comment to submit to the agency. The more noise on this issue, the better. We are setting the stage to make forest protection a must-do issue to be addressed, and to do that, we need all of you. So watch our webcast on the Northwest Forest Plan, follow the link to submit your letters to our representatives, and be on the lookout for more opportunities. We are launching our defense network in early January, and I look forward to seeing you all there. So with that, I'm going to pass it back over to Danielle and Maria for some more questions. Thanks
Thank
so much
you.
for having us.
Yeah, and you can unshare your screen when you get a
Awesome.
moment. Thank
Yes.
you. Yes, as we do at Oregon Wild, we like to connect the species and the habitat and talk about it very holistically, as it's all important in this web, this ecosystem. So thank you so much, Victoria. Okay, let's get back into some questions we have. So a question early on in the chat was just if Western spotted skunks do not like water. So I guess the alternative is, do they like water? Do they stay away from it? Do they like it? What do you have any knowledge on that, Maria?
Yeah, they really hate being wet is what I've figured out. You know, it's when we were trapping the spotted skunks, a lot of the time it was raining because we live in Oregon. And when they get really wet, they are unable to thermoregulate very well. So, yeah, they are meticulous groomers. We've seen a couple photos of spotted skunks that maybe got dunked in a river or something, but they are mostly very dry, very fluffy. And so when they're near these riparian areas, I think what they're doing is taking advantage of a lot of the resources near those creeks. So things like cover from predators. You know, there's a lot more shrubby vegetation in those riparian areas, but they're not actually in the water itself. Yeah.
Good to know. Thank you. How many young does a spotted skunk have? Are they communal or solitary animals?
Yeah, they're mostly solitary animals. So when we get them on camera, they are just by themselves. Very rarely will you get a photo of a spotted skunk with others. And in those cases, they're either mating or they are raising their young. So a female spotted skunk, I think, can have up to 6 kits. But typically, I think that number goes down to about 2 or 3 over the course of the year.
And given that they're only 2 pounds, those must be some tiny, tiny babes. Um, okay. There were a couple questions just curious, I think, about the trap mortality. I'm assuming it was maybe in your coloring and research, but maybe in also just general trap mortality for the state. You had, talked about them as being a non-protected mammal, or I think they classified as a predatory animal, from what I know. And so maybe you could speak to both because the questions are broad like that, just about trap mortality.
Yeah, so the numbers that I was presenting are mortalities that occurred in our traps. So unfortunately, you know, this is part of doing wildlife research. Sometimes things go horribly wrong and animals die, but we like to keep track of that information to make sure, you know, we can learn from that. In terms of statewide numbers, I'm actually not familiar with any of those numbers. Because the pelt prices are pretty low, I don't think very many people trap western spotted skunks anymore. Um, yeah, and those numbers, I'm not sure are made publicly available. But ODFW would be the people who would have those numbers, if anything.
Thank you. Yeah, you had mentioned that you think one of the reasons that there's not a lot of research or it hasn't been studied very well is just because it's nocturnal. I also wonder, and somewhat alluding maybe with a leading question here, but if you wonder if it's also because it's a non-protected species. And so they've sort of, in my experience, those that are unprotected or they're seen as abundant, they're like, well, we don't necessarily need to do research on them. They're fine. But that's what's an interesting situation with this, because they're both abundant, but really, if you don't know a lot about, or you haven't done a lot of research, can you really safely say that that's the case? So I don't know if you have thoughts on that. It's more my own musing, but yeah, it's just an interesting thing that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I've been a big proponent of is studying animals when they are still common on the landscape. There's a lot more information that you can gain from studying those common animals before they get rare on the landscape. There is some concern that the western spotted skunk populations are declining. Well, I've heard from a number of people that they're seeing fewer than they used to. And so getting a handle on what kind of habitat they need before they decline can help inform conservation actions later on. So yeah, that's something that has been limiting the conservation of the eastern spotted skunks because they are in a much more contracted geographic range now than they used to be.
Yeah, that's a great point because, yeah, just to have that baseline. I think they've, in Oregon, we've seen this go back and forth even with beavers. They're sort of like, well, they're not, they're not doing as well as they used to, but we can tell from the trapping numbers or the fact that they were not, a protected species that it must be fine. It's like, well, hold on, let's not make assumptions. Do we need to have the information to really say so? Um, so, Victoria, question for you. Do you know how much old growth remains in Oregon?
In Oregon specifically,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
maybe in the Pacific
no.
Northwest. Yeah, if you know Oregon or the
Yeah, so there's some competing data out there. It really depends on who you ask and what they're counting as old growth. And so what we know is there's less than 10% remaining across the United States from what there once was prior to the Timber Wars era. And so how much of that in Oregon, kind of hard to say with exact certainty. The Forest Service did put out an inventory earlier this year of old growth, but it doesn't map out specific acreage or anything like that.
Thank
It's the
you.
most coveted data in our work, I
Yeah.
think.
It's low, I think is maybe, yeah, it's still from what it was. Speaking of baseline studies of how, how to gauge something from what it once was. Yeah. Um, it says it seems they can clearly, sorry, this back to the Western spotted skunk, although maybe forest, this is the same, but it says it seems that they can clearly hold their own with a cougar. But have you seen any evidence of predation by feral cats? This person says we see feral cats everywhere on our trail cameras when we are camping.
Yeah. Fortunately, where we were conducting our study, we don't have any detections of feral cats. I could imagine that could be a pretty significant source of mortality. Bobcats, we think, are the main predators of Western spotted skunks in more of the untouched forests in Oregon.
Um, Somebody wanted to know if you or your colleagues got sprayed. I was like, I know we didn't ask that. You would think with all this interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. Pretty much every single time
Oh,
we were handling one of the spotted skunks. Yeah.
what did you do? Or what is that the tomato juice or what? I can't remember all the things you're supposed to do, but like what did you guys have to do as a result of that?
Yeah. Stay away from our other coworkers is the biggest thing. Tomato juice absolutely does not work. Hydrogen
Noted.
peroxide and baking soda paste with a little bit of dish soap.
Wow, what a occupational hazard you would not like. No, please, I do want to hang out. I smell, I know, I get it, but oh my gosh, that's funny. Um, can somebody else, if you could provide the reference to the Carrie Kirshner study, which is something we could share out if you're able to, that we can share out as a resource
Mhm.
for those who are interested
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
with the follow-up. Great. Let's see. We have still more questions coming up. We're going to give this 5 more minutes. Obviously, folks will drop off as they need to, but if you have 5 more minutes, we'll
Mhm.
keep going. Let's see. Oh, somebody wanted to know in that video that you shared at the end if the skunk was reluctant to leave the cage because of the sunlight.
Yeah, that could be it. When we release our skunks, we make sure that they are no longer sedated. And so that way they are fully aware of their surroundings, that way we're not causing additional mortality. Um, well, the trap is actually pretty safe for them. And so they're reluctant to leave it. Um, Typically what we do if they don't leave for uh, some time is start peeling away some of that burlap and that protection so they do find something that's more natural for them to be in during the day. Yeah.
There were definitely a lot of comments loving the various videos. I think folks really loved the cougar. I loved the cougar. I was like off camera and off sound, but I was like, oh my gosh, that is incredible to see it ward off a cougar from its own kill. So, what's the highest elevation you have detected them at?
Yeah. In our study, we detected them about uh I don't know the exact number, but the highest point on the Andrews is about 4,500 feet. We detected them probably around 3,000 to 3,500 feet.
Do the brainworms cause death for them? Do you know how they contract brainworms?
Yeah, the brainworm is actually really interesting. You would think that it has to have some sort of fitness effect because it is chewing away at that bone.
Mm.
Um, yeah, that bone. Um, we are not sure how that affects them. We think maybe it could cause them to become less uh, uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Less careful. But there have been a couple studies where they've pulled out hundreds and hundreds of those brainworms out of a single skull. So yeah, the load could be very high. And I think over time it can those brainworms can chew away more and more of that skull. So yeah,
Mhm.
it's hard to say.
Yeah. I think maybe two more questions and we'll wrap it up. So one, you've mentioned that they're a not protected species, so they're not, threatened or endangered, and have pretty much open hunting or trapping season rather. But do you know of any efforts to reduce or, I don't know if the effort would be to fully protect them because they'd have to probably be imperiled or be shown to be imperiled, but to at least reduce the year-round open trapping season on them? I don't know if you're aware of any efforts, or is it
Yeah,
maybe a matter of lack of research and just knowledge of the species?
yeah, I would say it's pretty data deficient, and so I am not aware of any efforts to increase protections. In Washington, they are now considered a species of conservation concern, I believe.
Mhm.
I think that happened within the last 5 or 10 years. So, um, yeah, different states have different policies.
Mhm. Yeah, and for that person, I'm not aware of that either. I will say that the state is updating, well, all states should be updating their state wildlife action plan, which is something that's federally mandated, and that states have these wildlife action plans, which is essentially a blueprint to protect and recover the most imperiled species in the state. And so Oregon is in process to update that. And so who knows, maybe there will be more species added on, like the western spotted skunk, but that's currently underway, and they're reviewing all the different species, like species of greatest conservation need, and assessing and updating the science and what's the latest research saying about the various native species in Oregon and whether they need more protection. So that's underway. So who knows? Maybe there will be more to add to that with this. And I would say the final question, let's see, can you tell us more about the rogue detection teams? And just we at Oregon Wild have worked with them in the past, and we know they're great dogs and the great work that they do. So I don't, yeah, it's just did you yourself take a dog out with them? And yeah, just curious about their interaction.
Yeah, I had a great time working with them. So these are dogs that have been rescued from various rescues and shelters. They're very driven, ball driven or toy driven dogs. And so they love to work. And so Rogue Detection has really done a service adopting those dogs and putting them to work. And so, yeah, they'll go out for, 5 to 8 hours a day, searching for these scats. I had the privilege of being able to go out with them a couple times, and it's just so much fun watching them work. Um, and so cool to see how different dogs actually work the landscape and the scents that they're trying to find.
Dogs are amazing too. We definitely believe that at Oregon Wild. Um, well, thank you all for joining and for hanging on so we could get through questions. And Marie, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. And same to you, Victoria. I think Victoria said, the Western spotted skunk is our new favorite animal here at Oregon Wild. So thank you for opening our eyes and to the importance of the species, and that we need to learn more. So thank you for your time, and thanks to all of you for attending the webinar. Happy holidays, happy new year, and Oregon Wild will be back in 2025 with more webcasts. So thanks so much, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, Danielle.
Thank you.